I'm Paul Andrus. I'm the Community Development Director for the county. I'm going to do a brief introduction tonight. Thanks for coming. If you haven't signed in, could you please do that? The sign-in sheet is at the door in the back. Just wanted to give a very brief overview of some of the things that we've been doing, that the county has done with respect to looking at our downtown in both the town site in Los Alamos and the White Rock Town Center. 2016, the end of 2016, we were able to complete our first comprehensive plan for the county. It was the first one in 28 years or so. That was a big planning effort and community outreach process to get input from the community on the general vision of what we want the whole county to look like over the next, hopefully not 28 years. We're planning on updating our comprehensive plan within the next few years here. That provided a policy framework that recommended that the county do downtown planning for both the town site and White Rock, and that we did through COVID. Actually, it was we had dozens of public meetings in person initially, and then throughout the pandemic online, and then finished up with council in 2022. And those downtown plans really essentially established the goals and priorities of what the community wants to see happen and prioritize in the downtown areas. And when we talk about that, we're talking about housing. We're talking about providing extra densities when it comes to housing, supporting small business, just creating a better economic environment as we move forward. So, and then as part of that, at the end of that process, we updated our development code. So it was very intentionally starting with the big picture and then focusing on the downtowns, and then ending up with the development code, which ends up prescribing our zoning code and our land use requirements and all of that good stuff. So now we're here to talk about the Metropolitan Redevelopment Area plan, which is essentially a toolbox, and you'll hear about that tonight, and then we'll have an opportunity to sit down and answer specific questions. If we don't answer your questions, we'll have some time afterward to focus. But this is really essentially a tool that's even focusing more specifically on a particular area of downtown. So I just want to, explain the differences between what these downtown plans are and what the MRA really does, which is a tool that follows the goals and vision of the downtown plans. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. So we have Amy from Groundwork Studio, and she can introduce herself and her teammate. And she'll go over the MRA, we'll answer questions, and then as I mentioned before, we'll have an opportunity to break out and actually focus specifically on anything else that still comes to mind for you. So with that, Amy.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We appreciate your time. Appreciate the opportunity to share more information about what the MRA is and what the process will be for creating the MRA plan and then implementing that plan going forward. Again, my name is Amy Bell. I am a principal landscape architect with a company called Groundwork Studio. We're a landscape architecture and planning firm. We're located in Albuquerque. But we're here tonight wearing our New Mexico Main Street consultant hat. And I'd also like to introduce Helen Ganal, who's up here in the front. She's also here with me. She's one of our planners with Groundwork Studio. The way that the New Mexico Main Street program works in our state, it's housed in the Economic Development Department. It's pretty cool. When you have a Main Street organization like Los Alamos County does, you have access to free technical assistance in the 4 points of Main Street, which are design, organization, economic vitality, and promotion. And so we work providing design and planning technical assistance to Main Street communities all over the state, of which there are over 30. But it's very cool that you all have a Main Street organization. These organizations, our executive directors, Jacqueline's here tonight, they work very hard to help local businesses, to help community members, to work closely with the local government to implement community-led projects. And so the technical assistance that we provide is at no cost to the county, and it is always requested by the community that we're working in. So to be clear, this is not the state saying, hey, Los Alamos County, you guys should have an MRA. This is Los Alamos County saying, hey, New Mexico Main Street, we're interested in doing this. Can you help walk us through the process and provide the assistance that we need to move this forward? Typically, we provide technical assistance to complete MRA designations only because the planning process can be quite large. Our firm, not wearing our Main Street hat, is just currently wrapping up an MRA planning process in Taos that was funded by a $50,000 community planning grant. But because this area is smaller in Los Alamos, our Main Street director has given us permission, has said it's cool, it's okay for you to go ahead and provide these services, do the whole planning process at no cost, because it's smaller. It's not necessarily a $50,000 planning process. So I'm going to talk a little bit first, generally about what the MRA is, get into a little more specifics about what some of the tools include, and then we'll talk a little bit about the East Downtown MR area, specifically why that boundary was selected, and next steps for the planning process going forward. So the Metropolitan Redevelopment Area Code is part of statewide code. And what it does essentially is it provides local governments, municipalities and counties with the flexibility, additional flexibility, to support revitalization and redevelopment in areas that are experiencing some barriers to economic activity, healthy local economic activities. These barriers can include low business activity, vacant or underutilized properties, deteriorating buildings and/or deteriorating public infrastructure, unsafe conditions, housing deficits, zoning conformance issues, obsolete planning and platting, and high unemployment or low income levels. MRA areas may not have all of these things. They may just have some of them, okay? What does the MRA do? So the designation of an MR area, which then includes a corresponding MRA plan, is going to outline eligible redevelopment policies, programs, and projects to address declining conditions. Once that MRA plan is adopted, it allows for the contribution of public resources to eligible private entities without violating the state's anti-donation clause. And I want to be really clear about that, is that the plan is very important because it identifies clear goals and strategies for what the community would like to see in that MR area, okay? And only projects that achieve those goals are going to be eligible to receive those public funds. So in a sense, when you have an MR area, the community potentially has more control over the type of development that happens in that area than if you did not, okay? MRA projects, we do have some examples, we have some on the boards. In different communities can really vary, and these are due to different characteristics, considerations, different community priorities. I'll give you an example. I know in Taos and also here, housing is a concern. Housing is a crisis, right? We really need to be thinking, and a major goal of the Taos MRA plan is increasing the amount of housing and mixed-use development in downtown. As a counterpoint, we're looking at designating an MRA in Corrales with vacant properties, simply because the village wants to be able to work more closely with community organizations and support those community organizations in developing and programming those vacant properties, and they need to have some additional flexibility in order to do that. So we can see, and those are primarily agricultural uses. So the priorities identified in the MRA plan can be very different, and the projects can be very different. It just depends on what is needed and what the community would like to see. We have 5 main tools that the MRA enables. One is an MRA fund. One point of confusion, the designation and creation of the MRA plan doesn't come with money. Like there's no like, you know, state or federal like MRA fund, if you have an MR area you get, it doesn't work that way. It just gives the county additional flexibility in how the county uses funds, okay? So often we recommend that a particular fund be put together that is designated to support projects that are just in the MR area. When we see communities that don't do that, oftentimes their MRA plan sits on the shelf because we haven't identified, here's the money and here's what we're gonna use it for. And also that fund is typically overseen by an MRA board, which is responsible for and is given the power to review MRA projects and make recommendations regarding allocations of public funds to those projects. Again, if we don't know where the money is coming from or who is overseeing those projects, often they just don't happen. Another tool is a tax increment financing district. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. This is not something that because you have an MR area you have to do. The county doesn't have to do this. The community can say we don't like this idea. What the TIF does is it captures an incremental rise in property tax revenue. So as vacant properties are developed, property tax for vacant properties is quite low, right? But as soon as you develop that property, there's quite a bit more revenue. So that increase in revenue is then captured and then reinvested in that area. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. It is not a requirement. It is a decision that needs to be enacted, I believe, by ordinance. Public-private partnerships are a big one. These are cooperative agreements between the local government and a private sector entity. They usually enable implementation of projects that may be too costly or high risk for either entity to do by themselves. Development incentives and direct contributions are another tool. These can include things like redevelopment tax abatements. A really simple one that we see in a lot of communities with MRAs are storefront and building infrastructure improvement grants. These are grant programs where the local government puts out a call for applications for businesses or property owners to say, I would like to repaint my facade, or I have a new tenant moving into my building and we need to fix some of the plumbing so that she can have this hair salon that she wants to have in order to be successful. And so these are ways that, again, the local government can help those businesses, property owners make their business look nicer, make it more functional, which might not be something that they could do on their own. And then the zoning code exemptions, I don't want to get too far into those because it can be confusing. The MRA doesn't make any zoning changes or code changes, okay? The plan can include recommendations to make those changes, and it also allows particular amendments to apply only to projects and properties within the MRA, not in other parts of the county. So again, the MRA board is responsible for overseeing the implementation and funding of the MRA plan projects to ensure community benefit. It's a layer of oversight. The board is established by local ordinance and may be comprised of council or commission members. So in the case of the county, it could be the county council. The MRA fund sets aside money for MRA projects. It can be allocated from a variety of local funding sources, and then layered with other applicable funding like CDBG grants, LEDA, capital outlay, and tax credits depending on the project and the requirements of those different funding sources. That fund is overseen by the MRA board. Again, there's a little graphic here that talks about the incremental increase in tax revenues. So when a TIF is established, the county sets that baseline. and says, okay, now, and you also set the number of years for which the TIF applies. 20 years is the maximum. And so that incremental increase can be captured for those 20 years. After that point, all of that revenue comes back into the same pot. Some examples of other communities that have TIF districts: Silver City, Albuquerque, Gallup, Farmington. Silver City, I know in particular, they raise about $50,000 a year with their TIF. They use it directly to support a storefront activation or building infrastructure grant. They just fold that right back in to supporting businesses downtown. There is recent legislation that was passed. Typically, or in the past, the TIF has only captured property tax increment. Capture of gross receipts tax increment is now also an option, but some of that process is still being worked out by the state. One other thing to mention here that we often recommend for communities who want to pursue a TIF is to do what's called a TIF bond and feasibility study. Communities like Albuquerque look at their TIF and say, we think, or not we think, but we project that we're gonna make this much money with the TIF. We wanna bond against that over the next several years so that we have all that money now. But before you do that, you want to feel very confident that you're gonna raise that amount of money with it. So we recommend doing these studies to understand the amount of money that could be raised, whether it's just with property tax or with property tax and GRT. Again, public-private partnerships. These are cooperative agreements. Something that's important to note, I think, with all of these programs is that there's no business or property owners that have to participate in the storefront activation grant programs, right? There's no properties that have to participate in any of these things. These are activities that are initiated by the idea of a project, and then, like in the case of this example, public-private partnerships, this would be looking at, example for Taos would be, because they have the priority for housing, one of our recommendations was, identify at least one vacant town-owned property that could be developed as a mixed-use housing project. So what the town would do is develop criteria for that mixed-use housing development, put out an RFP, decide what kinds of incentives they would want to provide that developer, and then work with that developer on a development agreement, which typically those agreements are going to include clawback provisions, right? So if that developer doesn't do what was in the agreement, that money comes back, or those resources come back. The other important piece here is the community benefit matrix. And some folks who were here early might have seen the beginnings of that in the back. Albuquerque uses something like this to score projects. And projects that score higher on the community benefit matrix are going to score higher in the RFP process. And also there's like a minimum, there's a project will not be considered if it doesn't score at a minimum on that community benefit matrix. Incentives and direct contributions, again, tax abatements, storefront activation grants, expedited permitting, impact fee waivers, gap financing grants. These are all things that are options. They don't all have to be part of the recommendations or the tools that the community, is interested in and that the county pursues as part of the MRA implementation. MRAs are weird little creatures, right? Because they're planning, they're economic development, they're real estate development, they're financing, they're policy, they're all of these things. And so it can be confusing. But there's some things that we want to be really clear that the MRA does not do. And it does not raise taxes. It does not allow eminent domain. It does not damage property values. We see no evidence in any of the over probably 50 MR areas that are in the state that MRA designation has actually damaged property value. It does not require participation in the improvement or incentive programs. And another thing to note, all properties in the MRA boundary will not exhibit characteristics of decline. I don't think there's any MR areas in the state where that would be the case. We're drawing boundaries around a general area. There's going to be areas with declining infrastructure, with vacancies, and there's going to be properties that are doing great. And that's sort of just the pattern of our development, right? That's okay. And the designation of the MRA does not harm those properties within the MR that are doing fine already. So the Downtown East MRA has been designated, resolution number 2408. The next step in our process will be to develop a plan that identifies the types of projects that may be supported by MRA funds, and which MRA tools the county is going to implement. This is the boundary. It's about just a little under 30 acres, with about 21 parcels at the east gateway to downtown. A major reason for designating this area was focusing on improving that gateway and capitalizing on the high impact location for investment of public resources. Another image of the boundary here with zoning overlaid. Again, while not all the properties in this area exhibit conditions of decline, some do, including aging and deteriorating infrastructure, low occupancy rates, and vacant properties. Zoning is mixed use. Current land use is primarily commercial, not all. We know that there are residential, that there's the apartments on the north side. And the inclusion of those really was intended for that goal of encompassing the gateway for downtown and allowing those property owners to work with the county to make improvements if they want to. And there is general alignment with the downtown master plan boundary. And I guess the point to make there would be, while the MRA plan is going to build on the goals identified in the downtown master plan, they might be slightly more specific. And that's a reason to have the MRA plan, because our goals for this particular area of downtown might be a little bit more specific. I don't know if I want to say different, but it allows, and this is why we're doing this planning process, to understand, really what are the priorities for this area of downtown versus the downtown area as a whole. So as far as timeline, we've completed number 1, the MRA assessment, number 2, the MRA designation, and we are now at the beginning of the MRA plan process. And this process will include additional opportunities for community involvement, and will eventually, the draft plan will go to County Council for public hearing and plan adoption. And then of course we want to include number 4, we don't want to finish the plan and then just celebrate and get on to the next one. We want to make sure that the plan itself gives the county and the community the tools to move it forward, but also that it's very clear what those immediate next steps are. And with that point, I want to point out, I know that folks have raised the question of well, we have the White Rock MRA, we have the White Rock MRA plan, why haven't we done anything? And I think that the timing is actually really great here, because we compare a lot of our Main Street technical assistance in terms of implementation for the White Rock MRA with this downtown MRA planning process. So things like establishing the MRA board, that MRA board can oversee the fund and projects for both White Rock and the downtown East Downtown MRA. So, and we are allowed to provide free technical assistance in support of implementation of the MRA too. So kind of going back to what I was saying before, a lot of planning processes in the state don't really help communities get through that. We need to create the MRA board, we need to give a group the power to move these projects forward. And we need to identify that MRA fund, and when those things don't happen, a lot of times we don't see communities use their plan. So we're excited about the opportunity to work with you all to move White Rock forward and to figure out what you all want to see in East Downtown. We do have a survey. If folks picked up the FAQs at the front, hope everybody grabbed a copy of those. There's some really great answers to questions that we're hearing a lot. That there's also the QR code to take the survey so that we can hear about priorities for East Downtown. And I think to answer questions, what we'd really like to do, instead of having the whole group do it, is that we'd like to break out into 3 groups at these tables. And so we have kind of 3 topic areas. We're going to spend about 10 minutes at each of these tables. So you'll have the opportunity to ask questions at each of these tables in each of these different topic areas. And then, of course, we're available to answer. If there's questions that don't fall into those areas, we're here to help with that too. But if I could just ask maybe like the first third of the room, take your chair over to the first table here, second third to the second table, and the back to the third table, and we'll have someone there to help answer questions at each of those tables.
If Amy left you with any questions on that piece after her presentation, we are here to talk about that.
I had a question. So, we were just talking about the retention pond. There's no intent to change it, but just in case it's included. Some people have concerns about being in an MRA boundary. So if there's no intention to change it, why not just exclude those areas so that those members of the community scared that somebody's going to come. And with occupancy being a criteria, like that 820 Trinity building, which is fully occupied, the apartments that are fully occupied, why include those if it's causing this stress with community members?
Anguish? Angst. Oh, angst. It's terrible. I don't, if you want to jump in at any point.
I mean, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's really about contiguous boundaries.
Yeah.
Because you could draw a zigzag all over the place and
And it would
nobody
be
would know
really-
what was going on.
It'd be difficult to define.
It would be really difficult to define the area, whereas this is, again, a contiguous block. And as Amy said before, that doesn't require anybody within that space to participate.
Yeah, because it's not a planning boundary
Right.
at all. It's not like a historic preservation boundary or anything that would call into use-specific rules for that area. It's really just an option to be in it.
Interestingly,
Like you can opt in or out, basically.
Yeah,
one of the reasons that this boundary was one of the reasons this boundary is what we ended up with was because we were trying actually to make it more clear by lining up with the downtown master plan boundary, which I think has caused confusion because then people think that maybe this is a planning boundary, like you said, with some kind of overlay zone or type thing. I can't speak for the county as to the ultimate decision to continue to include these properties, despite making people nervous. I think the idea is that we will have so much community engagement that everyone comes out of this process feeling heard and safe and secure and knowing they have resources available
And the
to them.
fact is that discussion was, the boundaries are established.
Yeah, the boundary is established.
To say stuff like that, like too late, we can't do anything for you, that's not going to develop trust with them.
well, were the boundaries put forward by the county manager or the planning manager?
The boundaries were a collaboration between the Main Street Department,
Okay,
Groundwork Studio, and the county planning department.
okay.
Yeah.
Was there
What is
community?
the basis, what is the factual basis behind your statement that there's no financial impact on being, for properties being included within an MRA? Because in real estate, you know, it's location, location, location. And if your location is in a blighted neighborhood, which is how the MRA, one of the definitions, I don't see how that doesn't affect your sales.
To the detriment.
So
To the detriment, yeah.
I don't know if this helps, but the current MRA plan that we're wrapping up is for the Taos downtown. That includes the historic Taos Plaza. And I don't think that any community willingly chooses to designate themselves in a way that they think is going to lower real estate values or drive away tourism. The idea is that the community has been given a larger toolbox, which they can use to assist their residents. It's an unfortunate part of the statute that the language that they use is blight. And no one, like, that's not a word that people have positive associations with, but that's not, in our experience with, so there's like 30 communities with MRA districts. There's about 50 because some communities have more than one. There has not been any correlation with any kind of property decline.
So it's in no way going to get back to bankers who don't want to extend mortgages or anything like that. It's because
Well, I'm
it's
thinking,
not that sort
okay,
of
we are
thing.
part of 800, and those are condo units. We own a unit within the building, but if we wanted to sell it, I really can't, yes, we bought it at top dollar. I can't believe that under the circumstances, you would find a buyer.
I think it will
like that.
actually ultimately, and please jump in, it's you, I know you wanted to say something, be positive for you if the community is able to put in contiguous like infrastructure improvements, widen sidewalks, increase accessibility, improve the parking lot with this toolbox that it has access to now.
And the overall, in that neighborhood in particular, this is, a lot of the blight is the Merrimack Center. It's not the 820 building. It's the old Smith building, it's the old restaurants that are, you know, in distress right now, they are. And in that neighborhood, if that shopping area is improved, it will increase the values of the properties that aren't touched in that area.
So whether you opt in or out of participation in any of the tools, that the surrounding areas that are severely blighted will be uplifted by the tools, and essentially the infrastructure will be improved, the placemaking will be improved, signage will be improved, walkability, connectivity, all of that is anticipated to happen within the MRA district, so that even if your individual unit isn't participating in any of that, the surroundings are going to uplift the whole area and thereby increasing property values overall.
Over what sort of time period?
This is a time period,
Depends
probably
on-
3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, really, it depends on how fast we're able to engage the community, create the plan together, roll out pieces of the plan, how much money is pulled from different sources to maybe put in the MRA fund, or grants that are applied for and received to layer funding, like a community development block grant, or like federal funds that can then be layered with MRA funds. You can do more if you have more funding, so it's contingent on different things.
So the next step is the MRA plan, right?
Yes.
So how long in your experience does a typical MRA plan take
Yeah.
to develop and get to
I think
implement?
minimum probably 4 months. The Taos MRA plan has been a longer process. It's been maybe 8 or 9.
So 4 to
yeah.
9 months.
Because
Yeah,
it's bigger.
it's bigger.
When you talk about community engagement, what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, because if you look at it, we're a town of 13,000 people. This is not even 0.01%.
Sure,
And
right.
this is because of lack of communication to the community. The reason I'm here is because a close friend of mine is on the utility department board. And she sent me a text saying, hey, she's in Scotland now, and she's like, hey, you want to go for this? And I'm like, okay, I'll go for it.
Yeah.
So I'm here.
detail.
Right.
Obviously.
Yeah, it's.
Well, and
Yeah.
the communication for the meeting that was actually held down in White Rock where the whole MRA development was passed was not good.
Was not good.
It did not get out I mean, we didn't know anything about it until a couple days before, and the information we received was very confusing as to what we were being told, and there was nothing in the communication as to where and when the meeting would be. The date, yes. The time and the location, no, nothing.
And I think part of this is
So-
the county's responsibility too.
You
And
need
the county needs to engage, have much better communication rather than putting it in a newspaper and hoping that you'll read that newspaper.
online.
What's the best way to reach you?
I mean, so the county does have everybody's emails, right? And
And the mechanism of the MRA.
you literally get no communication
County
from,
doesn't have everybody's email.
well, they should, or they should have emails.
That would be
or they should
ideal.
have
Utility.
Utility, through the utility bill.
You get all sorts of notices on the
You
utility.
don't get any communication. You have to dig. And the only reason I am now more actively engaged is because I'm retired. And the lack of young people over here is because they're so busy. So unless you hit them on the head with it, they cannot engage.
So I just want to say that some ways to find the communication that we do. I know in the county and the chamber, we have the chamber newsletter, we have newsletters through the county. We do post on our social media and our website, all of that. These types of meetings are
So
posted.
this is that's what I mean. I'm retired, so I can go. These are working moms, working fathers. They just don't. And so if
Are they gonna want to
To-
get spam
yeah.
email like 20, 30?
well, I'm not talking about like the utility bills. If there's a list of these are the topics.
So on the utility bill is
I
your
think that
suggestion.
makes
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah.
People do communicate.
And
Sometimes Santa Fe does that. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
We
I
have
know
done
it's
that in
something.
other communities. To clarify, for anyone who lived within a certain radius of the MRA boundary, we did send 2 notices about the public hearing happening. What we've done in Taos is we've had radio, like PSAs on the local radio station. We attended their Halloween event and their Paseo art event, several other like festivities, and we tabled with like a very large QR code, spread the word. So there are ways that I would assume we will also, I hope, do here that the county will want us to participate in to get the word out and get people's input. So I'm writing this down, and this will be one of the takeaways from the meeting is like more communication is needed, and in different venues, maybe going to people, like events that are already happening in
I mean,
the,
and the people in the MRA boundary may be interested, but they may be people outside who may be interested, and they may want to talk to people in the MRA boundary, and maybe in support of them or whatever, right? I mean, they're all citizens of the county.
Right.
And so I would want to, while MRA might have their best interest, I have their best interest more than MRA does.
you sound like a
So I
good
would
neighbor.
want- I would want to support them. I don't know what their considerations are because I don't live in the MRA boundary, but I want to support them because their considerations come before MRA does.
So one of the concerns I'm hearing was really just the communication and the boundaries were being established, that it wasn't well publicized or you didn't receive that.
Yeah.
Or the work on it in general.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know anything about it until we got this. And okay, in the announcement, sort of a meeting to pass this resolution, came the resolution as it had already been passed. It was included as a done deed, even though it hadn't at the time in. So it was a very.
The other thing we encourage is to go to the council meetings, and there's always public comment available to looking at,
You gotta know where to go.
Okay,
This one was being held down, and it turned out it was held in fire department.
It's always,
fire
the
station
location is
in,
always
Yeah.
publicized
in
where,
White
but that's what we want more of. We want to hear more of the public, see more turnout at these
Right.
meetings,
It's,
at these council meetings. And if you look at the agenda items, you'll see a packet.
We have these
and
too,
the time and
if
location
anyone
is always
has concerns they want to write down
We
for us.
do need more voices.
My name's Helen. I guess I didn't introduce myself.
If possible.
Yeah, I'm with
I
Groundworks.
mean, it's one way to make your voice heard.
right.
Yeah.
So I have a question back to when she was talking. So as a private citizen who owns a property within the boundary, is that private citizen, are they able to go to the board and say, I want to do this with my property and present a plan? Is that what this is? Or it's a bigger group, it can only be Columbus Capital because they own this big huge chunk, so they're the ones, or anybody in there?
Yeah.
What?
Anyone in the boundary is able to bring forth proposed projects. So it can work several different ways. It could be a request for proposals from the county, or it could go the opposite direction.
Okay.
And like the example she was giving with plumbing for a hairstylist, that would be what your
Yeah.
an example
Maybe that
for you.
owner came to the board and said,
Yeah.
I need this, can we?
And then the board would, depending on what we come up with the plan and what we put in your community benefit matrix, the board would have a process for deciding if what you asked for qualifies and upholds the values that were put forth in the plan. Maybe they would do something similar to Albuquerque where they score it with this matrix.
Yeah.
And then they would decide to move forward.
So who came up with this matrix? Because I feel like there are things not on here.
This is just, so I made a 5-page spreadsheet of a matrix, and then Amy was like, no one's gonna read that. So, and then it had to fit on this board, and so we tried to pare it down into like sort of baskets.
Okay.
And I don't live here also, so what I put on is based on the downtown master plan, some of the goals that were put forward in that, and then pulling a little bit from some other matrices. So that's why it would be beneficial if you leave comments or vote, and then there will be hopefully continued opportunity to.
Because the thing that I personally feel like we're missing across everything I read here is the small business. There's nothing here that says keep the small businesses thriving in this town. Instead, we're talking about, do I have a walkway? Well, maybe there's going to be no businesses, so great, have a walkway, but where's the business?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Or you know what I mean?
Businesses, I don't know if it's on there, but businesses are absolutely part of.
I just took the survey.
Oh, huh?
And there's 4 or 5, and then it gives like 20 different types of businesses out there.
Okay,
How to
good.
help the existing businesses.
Okay.
Or, and so make sure to do that survey.
Yeah,
And
that's
tell all
good.
your friends, because that is a real good way to get a lot of public input for them to process.
So does diversify the community's economic base, would that come?
That could mean a lot of different
Businesses? Yeah, because what about promoting?
All right, guys, specifically, there was a proposal about making affordable options for mom and pop small businesses in the plan. I thought I read that in the part of the.
We haven't made the plan yet.
Well, I mean, as a proposal.
Maybe it was from the downtown master plan.
It was in the information about today. The ad that in the
Okay. Oh, okay, great. Well then, I think Jacqueline and Paul might be equipped to, because I think they probably sent out the information.
Yeah, that's what I read it.
Okay.
Why? So affordable options for.
Yeah, and
You've reached the how will this Los Alamos East MRA affect me if, so we'd love to hear your questions related to that statement or similar.
It's hard to hear in this room.
Yeah, if you need us to yell, we can totally do that. Charlie, can I deposit my rind on your
Use your outdoor voice.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's all right.
I'm talking
We're all
to my
family
children,
here.
but
Exactly.
I don't believe I know this gentleman.
So does anyone want to start?
Yeah. Is anybody wondering how this downtown east MRA will affect you? Okay, thanks for coming.
Have you decided whether the name is East Downtown or Downtown East?
I thought it was always downtown east, so that's the first I've seen it that way.
East LA.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we were very thoughtful about that. Do you want, we can put that on a sticky note.
Yeah, that probably should be clarified so the messaging's on the specific.
Yeah, we can do that.
Keeps going back and forth, depending on which PowerPoint slide you're looking at.
Well, it's our community and we can have that say too, so, but yeah. Any more in-depth questions?
I don't understand the anti-donation clause, if we're getting past that. Because we're talking about, it looks like we're helping a private entity do what they're supposed to do, what they want to do. And especially if there's structures in the MRA boundaries that do not meet the criteria, like my building.
Well, as she was giving the presentation, like not all properties
I just
will
don't
meet
understand
all of the criteria.
how I could be eligible for something, because my building does not meet the criteria. So how could I apply for public funding without violating the anti-donation clause? That's what I don't understand.
Well, your property would qualify just because it's within the
I'm just
within
saying,
the
but
boundary.
it's not falling apart, it's in good condition,
Sure.
it's fully occupied,
Right.
it's fully used. So I don't meet the criteria. So how is it possible that I could apply for this and get public
You'd have to
fund?
prove a
Because you
community
don't-
benefit. You'd have to prove a community benefit if you applied for it.
Well, I
Yeah.
could say, well, if I can see more patients, that's going to be better for the community.
But then seeing more patients would have to be one of the things that was identified by the community as one of the priorities for that. So
But if you said we want to improve our sidewalk structure to have better ADA access for my patients, or because we want to have seating with covered area or whatever, that absolutely would.
I mean, the New Mexico Code is very specific about criteria for MRA. The law is very specific on what meets that criteria.
It's not required that you meet all of the criteria. Amy is really careful
you don't
about
meet any of
letting
But
people know.
MRAs have passed legal scrutiny, I presume, right, within New Mexico, so that's sorted then.
Well, I think there could be a challenge
Right.
there.
It's sorted.
Well, it has, but yeah, it's been tested, and there are precedental things. I think, but the idea of a community benefit could apply to not just the building, perhaps, but the areas around the building being improved that are a community benefit. If not necessarily associated with perhaps the building that you are in, but if there were a project within the area that had affordable housing in it, say for instance, whether created new or perhaps renovated those existing residential buildings, fit the criteria of the Affordable Housing Act, that's where one of the ways in which you get around, to use that's the terminology people have been saying, that don't impact the Anti-Donation Act. And again, if the ultimate result of the project had clear attachment to community benefit, those are the ways in which it would work. Aside from, it wouldn't be impacted by the anti-donation.
I mean, I keep thinking about these high-rise apartments that are going to be $3,000 a month in rent. It's going to be luxury. And I'm just thinking, does that serve the community?
It's not an affordable, it's a market rate development that's being proposed, that's true. My general, it would not, that portion of the project would not be eligible as an MRA project. That wouldn't be fundable in and of itself.
Like the luxury.
But any right-of-way development, public infrastructure, because we all have, that area is old infrastructure.
So some of it.
Anything, some of it.
But not like the luxury apartment.
No. If that was an affordable housing project, technically speaking,
if there was a mix, like if there was a mix, like that might be potentially applicable.
But there's also, it's a mixed use that's being proposed, so it's helping support others. Plus, we know that our market is so dire that releasing folks that are taking up spaces that they can over afford and having them be able to go ahead and move, like size up or whatever you want to say, that folks who've been waiting to get in can get into those spaces. That's what I feel like is really
So
tight here.
you could have then market rate housing over retail, for example?
Yeah, and
that would be
it would release. It most likely would release some of the lesser.
But the way in which, you know, again, if you're using public, local government or county involvement, the portion of that project that becomes a community benefit or community asset is what we hang our hats on as part of the MRA. So, and because there's an aggregate cost to every project, and part of the cost is not just the building or the housing itself. It's infrastructure, it's open space, it's transit stops, it's all of that
Parking.
stuff.
Parking is an interesting one too. Because
Public parking.
Yes, public parking, because we tend to get worried, and like we also don't want just like a sea of empty parking lots. We have kind of that situation, so
we have that already.
If the developer can propose something that's more efficient and effective and provides public spaces too, so that you're ticking multiple boxes, that's really critical too. So there's multiple. It's more than just saying, hey, we want you to help us out.
I mean, it's
really
going to be very
expensive
high
housing.
rent. It's going to be very high rent for the residents and for the businesses. Like if I were to be in that space, my rent would go up 4 times, or my monthly payment. This is not affordable rent for businesses.
It's helpful when more spaces come online, though, to release, so that like, then the costs of the other rentals maybe go down a little bit too.
It's going to be very,
a little
very
more supply.
Scarcity drives prices.
Yeah.
Right, but also that project predated the MRA, isn't that right? Like that went into front of planning and zoning before the MRA.
Yes.
That's
the
right.
one you're talking about.
So,
right. I just
So
think that's
that,
really
I'm just
important.
saying, is that eligible for MRA funding?
That building,
The rent, the high rent for businesses and residents.
I would imagine they'd have to have something like inclusionary zoning where they said 20% of the apartments would be reserved for below, like 80% AMI.
Or they would be sure and include smaller spaces for commercial, so it wasn't just a several very large, only franchise can afford scenarios.
How much?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just saying, how much public funding for a building that's going to be very, very expensive for residents and businesses?
I'm sorry, you should ask.
So, well, my question was, I just recently heard that if you rent like a business around here, that you're responsible for upkeep and such versus the landlord, which I've never heard about in this moved here. Had that before.
Yeah.
But so, how does that work when you then bring in these new buildings and new businesses? Is that going to still be the case, because then you might have tenants that aren't able to upkeep the same level that you're needing it to stay?
Well, it's another reason why it's important to offer affordable or incentives for being able to rehab existing structures, because keep in mind there are a lot of commercial spaces that are already in existence that fall within this MRA.
Right.
And so rather than the landlord being like, I can't afford it, it sounds like a nice kitchen, but good luck, and maybe there's a way for them to work with the county and say, hey, we would like to do this. We see a need for more, ADA accessible, up to code, blah, blah, blah. We want to be able to have some help with that. If that's identified, if you all write notes and say, that matters to me, that could inform the rubric by whatever they would judge. And then also, I think it's important to note that in MRA zones, like those are usually areas that stay small businesses, stay locally owned, way more likely than just massive developments that are just built wherever with no public input. This actually provides an additional layer of public opportunity for input, right?
Right, and but part of the scenario here is that private property is still private property, and each individual property owner has a lease, and this is how they structure their leases, and that's it's kind of up to that arrangement in terms of who's. But you have a new property. If it's potentially a new property, then there's a lot of those maintenance and upkeep items are not there at that point.
There's no asbestos removed.
Right, no asbestos, correct.
So that's not,
Right.
so those leases are not county dictated, they're per
No.
landlord?
It would still be private market oriented.
Well, except where the county comes in is when you want to open your business. Now you're telling us you can't open until you come up to this or this or right? The one next to where Penji and Bosi Brothers, that little art studio or whatever, like she can't even open because somebody's telling her she can't.
Yeah, I don't want to get into this particular scenario, but she actually was able to open. She did get a business license.
So my point is, the county can still dictate.
That's code. And
They
Right.
can enforce code.
Exactly. I just was.
We're still
heard more about like leasing and landlords kind of saying, "Oh, I'm not going to do that." But
also
if you got mold, your problem. You know,
Right.
just
And you should know, you should chat with us and find out LACBC. Because we like to
that
work
would be
with
good.
business owners and like we, you know, we can give you some information about that. So that's Main Street Chamber. We have several other. But yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and we're also going to tell everyone, don't sign any lease until you come talk to us.
Yeah.
Because you'll find out what fire would say. You'll find out what building's going to tell you, and then you'll go, oh, okay. Well, wait a minute. I need an architect to write me a letter that says it's okay before they can issue, let you go forward.
And they'll even do a pre-app meeting with you now, and they'll meet you at the property before you've signed the lease, and they will help you. So it's actually kind of amazing. Like the county's really put a lot of things into place. But anyway, you've got somebody else too.
Well, I was going to follow up with that in that if you've got these owners inside a commercial building, multiple owners, if the MRA says, okay, we're going to do this, it's going to be the parking and the awnings and the sidewalk, then are they required, every tenant has to do that?
They would have to propose that. The county's not enforcing that.
So the MRA, the board is not saying, hey, we want this here.
They would have to ask, they could never ask for any help or assistance, and that would be fine too.
So, and if they did come up and say, okay, this is something, we all approve it, does every tenant then have to do it by a certain deadline? Or
And that's kind of a specific case because they are individually owned, and I would say no. No,
so they can still
if we, and again, there's a structure about the business condo association and how they make decisions about the common property, so to speak. But no, I mean, that would have to be an agreement. That would have to be, that's what they want to do.
Before they take a contract.
Yeah. Oh, and then the other thing I was going to say is, this is what I've been trying to say to folks too, is that this designation doesn't put the county on the hook to participate in just any project that comes along. This is, again, we've got the downtown plan that says we want these things, we want these sides of the menu, and they can be variables, but these are the overlying goals that we have. We want, viable small business opportunities, we want, housing, we want all of these things. The county isn't compelled to actually be a partner to a project that's not going to address those goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
and that's part of the matrix, what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, and
what
if
you
that
put in
project,
the
and if that project still met code and, it had all of its legal rights to move forward, it could, it just wouldn't get public assistance. Right?
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. So it's also not stopping. It doesn't mean that everybody's got to fall in line in order to have a project. It's not that additional layer.
It's a tool. It's a toolbox because there's a few things in there, but.
I think the biggest threat is that there are so many impediments and it's so complicated and it's so long that none of the tools ever get used and nothing happens. I think that is the threat. It's not that we have too much awesome stuff going in downtown, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, like Amy said, the timing is really good because they've made.
This is your 5-minute warning for the table you are currently at.
TIF component.
She's good, isn't she?
Yeah,
very good. Very good.
Adding the TIF, now that's available. It's also now New Mexico Main Street's helped several main streets and areas do this, and they've come. So when we brought them in to do this project, they said, "Awesome," because we want to help you actualize the White Rock one too. So we want to help you go ahead and. Got your plan already, we'll get you through the process to have a plan for this one, and then we'll also help you set up, these are the tools, this is the matrix, this is the group, obviously with all the buy-in and the county management, making sure it's the right process, but still. So then instead of it just going, that's my plan, we instead go, and here's how we do the plan. And that helps, because I hear what you're saying, and that's the part, and we see it, we see other communities doing it. It's exciting. Like Las Cruces and Lovington, there's several places
really
where
moving out.
and they don't just use MR funds.
And we're not just limited to MRA
Yeah.
either. I mean, we have a commitment from council to look at opportunities when they, and we do it. We have to have some semblance of a project proposal on the table, either as an MRA or what have you, and then we can respond to it, particularly if it meets our goals. Sure.
So do you guys see the MRA board kind of like a P&Z board, transportation, all of our current county boards? Is it like going to be one of those type of boards?
That's a good question. It could be one of something like that, or it could be county council that ultimately,
Right.
because in what that would potentially do, and I'm not going to speak for council here, but it's an option that could help perhaps streamline the process.
Because ultimately they would have to still approve it.
Yeah.
So, especially for, we have things that we're like, okay, get going.
But that'll be their decision at that point.
We'd have special meetings.
So are we putting that on the agenda soon, Councilor Wrighty?
Well, my biggest concern is nothing will happen.
Yeah.
We have nothing happening empirically, right? So I think just getting something happening and just making sure people understand the parameters and what the options are. And yeah, I think, I don't know, just my opinion, I think council should probably be the board. I think it's going to be difficult if we wind up having a separate board than council.
Because the timing for financials and everything.
Because we're going to have to do it anyway.
It gives us one place to come grumble. Like we can just come and grumble, like it's very convenient, because we can grumble to people who then would have to make the decision anyway.
Online.
Yeah, so it makes it easier. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just moved here like 10 days ago. Wow. So I'm in White Rock. In White Rock. So do they already have?
Yes, in the business district of White Rock, and it is on our website, multiple websites, but yes, there is already one in place.
It's approved.
Okay, yeah.
In 2020, I think.
And there are projects, and it's, it feels really quiet from the public side of things. There are projects in the works. There are things that there's desire to move on, and we can, anyway, but there's other things that we'd like to see done, and we know that some of the components coming from this plan are going to help inform it.
Right.
And we know Councilor Wrighty's going to suggest that we get going on.
I'm on the record.
Yeah, and I think what we what we didn't have initially when that was established was a board, and that's the piece that still has to happen.
Also, the TIF wasn't legal.
The what?
The TIF was not
Oh, gotcha.
So it's time to go ahead and put that in place too, because it's that clock we'd like to start.
Yeah, we need the ordinance for the TIF
Yeah.
and the board established.
Are you doing that too?
We have to.
Yeah.
I've been asking for that.
Okay.
Because but we have to have the plan first, so we can actually have one in White Rock.
You have a plan.
So we have a plan in White Rock, so we could do it there. Then there was some discussion about
I think we need to clarify that with Amy, because
What's that?
my understanding was that as other MRs come online, they can draw from the same pool of funds.
I heard that it was not. You had to.
It's not.
So
It
White
has to
Rock
be.
will have its own funding.
Is that for TIF versus the MR
That's for
funding that you all have already allocated?
That's from the TIF.
It's the
Okay.
TIF piece,
So the TIF
but
funds have to
Because the
stay
TIF
there,
is
yeah.
tied to the boundaries
Right,
of
it's
the...
just tied to the properties and that increase in value.
but the MRA, the council does have line items for MRA.
You were with the county?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So, this may not have anything.
That's fine. If you have questions, ask your questions, please.
Okay, what is the track record with this MRA idea, which apparently has been around and used across the state, in terms of its impact on actually fostering economic development? In other words, it would be nice to have nice covered walkways and maybe a little park area and everything. But in Los Alamos, we just don't seem to get track.
Right.
I mean, that's why we got all these empty buildings.
It's our county development.
So, is there a cause and effect between the MRA and this economic development happen?
That's a really great question, and I would say yes in the communities where they use it. Okay, and this is something we've been talking about with.
For example, can you give some?
I can give you examples. I think Silver City is a really good one. It's a small scale example. They do get the money that they get from the TIF, and they do support their local businesses with it. I just was on a meeting a couple of months ago. I don't know if folks are familiar with Silver City, but the Buffalo Bar, they have a local business owner who now owns that, and is just really trying to clean it up, open up the bar, open up a market space in the big building next to it. And he's getting it from community members. They're saying, like, you know, why aren't you moving faster? And the storefront looks terrible. And, you know, he's just doing the best that he can. So we said, you know, hey, you know, you're in an MR area. The town could give you money to move it faster. And so we set up a meeting, and the, you know, town manager said, you know, no, I've got these funds. Like, we can help you fix the roof, and we can help you do the demolition. And because that work is preserving historic building, it's improving business life downtown, it achieves the goals identified in the MRA plan, it's an eligible project to receive MRA funding. So that's just a very specific example. I would say over the last, you know, 10 years where Silver City has had their MRA, I think you've seen a reduction in vacancies. You know, and this is in partnership with other programs. The MRA is not a silver bullet. Farmington is a great example of a community who's really used their MRA to support businesses, you know, in multiple MRA districts. But really, I think their downtown is a great example because their vacancies are way down. They've redone their Main Street, which is a big difference. But one thing they used their MRA for was to create agreements with businesses. There's a couple of restaurants who wanted to have outdoor seating, but it would have been in the public right-of-way, right? So the agreement says you can use the public right-of-way for your outdoor seating, which otherwise would not be allowed with the anti-donation clause, right?
See, that might actually help us here because our county development is stopping a lot of progress in our town, and maybe something like that would help in those areas where we couldn't otherwise get a variance or a way around.
Another way, I'm sorry, Sharon.
No, go ahead.
Another way could help economic development is that if, for instance, we can get some of these larger housing developments off the ground, it'll drive up foot traffic downtown, which would help support more businesses.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Which we haven't been able to recover from since Amazon kind of took over a lot of the retail. And then with...
Yeah, but what you hear is that the reason there aren't businesses there is because the rents are so high. Even the Regional Development Corporation, we had a meeting with them with the AAUW and talking about why aren't there more businesses? And the comment was, the rents are too high. That's why the bike shop went down to Santa Fe.
Yep. And I think it's twofold. I think it's rents too high, and the Community Development Corporation is making it too hard to get businesses in because they're rigid on all of those, you know, codes. They've driven the code through the roof where you can't do anything.
Well, and they're more state codes too.
Yeah, everything is just going.
Leaf and Beef has been delayed for months opening because of the state, not the county.
And that's true, it's state and county, you're right.
That's what we're hearing a lot of in Taos because a lot of their development goes to CID, goes to the state.
And that's exactly, so you're right.
It's the
State and county. And instead of helping the businesses figure it out, they're going, you go figure it out on your own.
Or bring me a rock.
Yeah, and that's
And
what
then
they
you
told
get
us,
another
bring us a rock.
inspection.
Well, what rock? What do you want? You go figure it out. We had to go read code. We shouldn't have to do that as a small business.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the state made a change recently where now they're asking, before they do their approval for water or electric, they're making sure that the businesses didn't previously have to pull permits for mechanical or pull permits with the county for mechanical. So it made it more expensive and slowed it down.
More expensive and slowed them down. So tied to what you were saying.
Some of that this can help with, but certainly not. You know, this is a piece in a much larger ecosystem.
So when you were back to Silver City talking about them, where did the TIF come from? Where did those funds come from for different ones you've been a part of? Because I heard you in your presentation, but what have you seen in reality? Where's that money coming from?
Well, so up to this point, the base has been set for property tax, for that increase in property tax. And so when you see, it's small, right? It's small, but there is legislation that was put into place 2 years ago now. Maybe it was just last year, that would allow for the inclusion of both local and state GRT. My understanding is communities could move forward with including the local GRT. The state's still figuring out how the state GRT, and that's I don't know if folks are familiar with TIDS, it's what Las Cruces has. The state is often very reluctant to give up state GRT. So the legislation has been passed to allow for that, but the processes for how that actually happens are still being figured out. But it's a possibility, and it could be a game changer in terms of how much money you could collect with that increment, right?
Most of those go on the ballot, or not necessarily?
So the designation of the TIF would be enacted by ordinance.
And then those funds underneath it, whether they're GRT or bonds or whatever, those go to ballot or not?
So it's just property tax. It's just the funds collected for property tax. And
when we talk about property tax, don't I vote on that?
That we vote for increases on property tax, or is it have to
vote? So it's not. It would just be. It would
cover their infrastructure.
It would just be an increase in revenue for property tax. So again, when you have vacant properties, and maybe it does work different here. I don't know.
I'm not sure about taxes.
You know, it's not like we're not going to designate the MRA and everyone's property taxes are going to go through the roof.
Right.
It really is. It's the increased revenue that you get because you've increased the value of a vacant property, and that property tax is increased as a result of that.
That individual
Where
property
does the
tax.
money come from to initially?
Right.
Yeah, so with the TIF, it's a very slow start.
It is a slow start.
Buildings are dilapidated.
But this is where, county manager was in another one of our groups, and she said, the county has already identified buckets of funding that they could use to support MRA projects.
So they may help start some of this.
And
Right, and
there's
that's-
some HUD funding that might be available.
You could layer,
Housing and urban
because that's it. The funding for MRA projects doesn't just come from the TIF. It could come from the general fund. It could come from lodgers tax. It could come from any sort of wherever the county says, like, we have funds to pull from this bucket to support these projects.
Well, and that's good to hear, because I would hate to hear it's always going to be pushed on us as, property owners to have.
One thing to bear in mind is that you don't necessarily have to increase the property tax for the TIF. It's the revenue that's going to be collected. And if you want to access it at the beginning, that's for that conversation about putting out a bond. If you have confidence that
You can actually achieve.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Like if we have good confidence that we're going to raise,
upfront
$10 million over 5 years, we would bond against that and then have those resources up front. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know who owns what in town, but I do know that a large part of Merrimack is Columbus Capital.
Right.
And so is there some sort of all of it, yeah. Is there an issue there in terms of the MRA being of particular value to one company that may have simply bought in at the right time? And now,
Well, I think
Because of how big they are, maybe?
that seems to me preferential
Right,
treatment.
exactly. So that's
Well,
a
but
good
they're not
question.
going to receive public funds for just doing whatever.
Well,
Right.
no, but they are getting funds to.
Well, no, I don't know that there's
their property.
they're not receiving any public funds at this point. That's
Correct.
not possible until after
Right.
the MRA plan is complete. And if they were to receive public funding, the project that they would need to implement would need to achieve the goals set in the MRA plan. So essentially what this does is this gives the community much more say in what that development looks like if they want to access public resources. Does that make sense?
I see.
Also, if you look nationally, no redevelopment actually occurs nationally in any place that's strictly privately funded. So when they have something this size, it has to have a public-private partnership. Otherwise, it's just not doable.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, well, yeah, but I mean, I've heard the number bandied about that Columbus Capital needs something like 30 million to be able to do the development that they put out. What was it, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when they had all the meetings about how they would redo Merrimack.
Yeah.
That was before 9% interest rates.
Right. So it's
that's a big gap.
But that's a lot of money that would be going to a single company now, and if it benefits the community, well, that's good. But it also, I understand anti-donation.
Yeah, it's there for a reason.
I think
yeah.
there's a fine line there between pooling money for a good objective and benefiting a small group. So, okay.
That is a good point, though. It's the 900-pound gorilla.
Sure. So have you seen in some of the ones you're already talking about across the state where they had maybe a building that had multiple owners, and it was agreed that, hey, we're all going to do an awning or a sidewalk or something, and some owner said, yeah, we don't want to do that, so these opted in, these didn't, or how would that work with the multiple owners?
That's a good question. I don't think I can't think of any examples like that.
Yeah.
So do all the owners usually join together and say, hey, we all want to do this, or?
I've not worked in any situations where there's been multiple owners in one building.
Okay.
And that would be our situation.
Yeah.
We're in the 800 building.
Ah.
Do our condo regs or whatever set up that address something like that we all have to vote on?
Well,
I mean, the vote would go whatever way Capital wanted to go, Columbus Capital, because they have most of the building.
Is that the same building
Generally,
Shins in?
MRAs
So, I mean, you're
are
probably at that
dealing
meeting where we
with
actually heard Columbus Capital say
pre-war
that they're not going to
development.
force
Pre-war
everybody
cities.
out. They're not
And so your facade
because they have the
improvement might
majority
be
share
a
of the building.
long, but it's
And
one
they're not
story
going to force
high,
them to do like
and
improvements
it's got
that would
multiple
be
tenants that own
burdensome.
things differently.
Yes.
But
Or you
the
can call
building
their
that they're
brothers.
all in.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We did hear that.
We did hear it.
I'm not forgetting that.
See, good for you.
Your courtyard. I mean,
So
they
you
have
guys
multiple walks from one side to the other.
Yeah,
So
we're
then
on
you've
the
got
Christian
multiple
side.
units down the
Same.
way.
Oh,
You know.
okay.
Yeah, interesting.
And no exterior
yeah, we need to. I want to do a little more research into that.
Yeah, you have to look at that building.
What were y'all just?
I was describing that building to her.
Oh,
The
okay.
building that's, yes.
And that's kind of why I'm asking, is I'm not an owner of it, but I know the people that are. And
Right.
You just
Yeah.
don't want to burden one because the many, you know.
Right.
I don't know how it would work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because typically the projects we work with are one owner, one parcel,
And it's
one
easy.
building.
Yeah.
But then what do you do for, I mean, I can see a owner of a building saying, well, I need to put in new windows, display windows, or I need help doing something to my building. But if you're talking about the infrastructure around, including walkways or that kind of thing, that will take that would take buy-in from a number of businesses.
Exactly.
You can't just improve it in
Common
front of
property.
Right.
Yeah, so
So all of that's still all private property that you're talking about.
yeah, no, I mean, well, like in Silver City, I mean, if they wanted to
Doing
have
public sidewalk.
better
Parking lot, improve the parking lot.
better parking lot or better walking, I haven't been there in a couple of years, so I don't know. They had
Yeah, well, I mean, like, and in Silver City, the sidewalks would be the responsibility of the town, but it sounds like, like the building you guys were talking about, there's like an interior courtyard where you might want to improve that, or the parking lot maybe on the private property, yeah.
Yeah.
Which are becoming cavernous.
Yes. Right, very much.
I think we hear that everywhere. That's unfortunately. That's like, not to say it's not an important problem. Yeah, it's just not special.
Yeah.
It's New Mexico tradition.
Not unique. It's not unique to here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't even have that much freezing ice.
Yeah.
Compared to back east.
True. Would really like to encourage folks to take the survey if you haven't already. Please share that with your friends, colleagues, family.
Back there that has
The frequently asked question handout has.
It's on the side. There's a yeah.
Good. Thank you guys.
And
for
all of
coming.
this will be on the county website as well. So you can point people to there. A lot of the background information, the presentation will be posted up there. And we'll have more meetings like this. We're here to answer questions,
Okay.
The website, the city or county website might be a little hard to navigate, but if you're on the main page and you look at events, this would be listed under the events as well as on the planning department page. In the community development department. Yeah.
I like that page, the development that has all the different projects around town. That's kind of a nice place to see stuff like this.
Oh, the what's around me.
Well, I don't know where it is on the website, but it talks about all the different housing developments and how many pieces, how many people live there, or I don't know.
Oh, I haven't seen that page. Okay.
Everything that they're kind of.
That might be on the economic development page.
Might be
Or housing, new housing page. We got a new website and it's causing all the departments
Well, it's
difficulty.
up on the screen, lacnm.com/MRA. That should take you right to
Directly, way easier than trying to navigate the website.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
I haven't tried, so I can't speak to it.
Where are your offices in Albuquerque? Where are you all located?
Our office is in Uptown, in the One Park Square building. Yeah, but I'm
your first name again?
on the road half the time. Amy. Yeah. Amy Bell.
Bell?
Bell. Ding dong. Yeah. Thank you guys for taking the time.
Thank you for your expertise.
Appreciate your